we're talking about addition. We've been talking about addition. Addition is combining groups. When you add, most of the time the groups are unequal, because if the groups are equal, you know that you can multiply. Multiplication is repeated addition. That's probably how you were first introduced to it. You probably had a teacher that said instead of writing something so long as this, you could simply say 2 times 5, because you have 5 groups of 2. Well, now we're to the point where the question might be, what about repeated multiplication? What if we have to write 10 times 10 times 10 times 10 times 10? This answer is 100,000, because 10 times 10 is 100, and this 10 times 10 is 100, and this 100 times 100 is 10,000, times another 10 is 100,000. Repeated multiplication can be written more simply than that. An exponent is what we would use to show repeated multiplication. So here is 10,000 that could be written 10 times 1,000, or 100 times 100, or 10 times 10 times 100, or simply 10 to the 4th power. An exponent is a small number that attaches to its base to tell you how many times to write it. 10 to the 4th power has 2 parts. The first part, the 10, is called the base. The base is the number that's written as a repeated factor. 2 really important words to remember. Repeated means it's the number you write over and over again, and factor is a number in a multiplication problem. So an exponent is repeated multiplication. 4 in this number is the exponent, and the exponent is the amount of times to write the base. So in order to write this number in factor form, we would write 10 4 times, and because 10 must be a factor, we would write it with a multiplication sign. So 10 to the 4th power can be written in factor form like that. Its answer is 10 times 10, which is 100, and 10 times 10, which is 100, and 100 times 100, which is 10,000. This is a chart that shows us 3 different ways to write exponents. We can write it in exponent form, which means we're going to use a base and an exponent. This is called factor form, where we've listed out the repeated factors. And this is standard form, which is the number that we very often use. Standard form means the regular way. So, standard form is often used with numbers when you're comparing word form to expanded form, and standard form is standard. Standard form is the way we recognize numbers. This one is already written in factor form, and we are to write it in exponent form as well as standard form. So, 12 times 12 times 12 is written in factor form. In order to write it in exponent form, we have to know what the repeated factor is, which is 12, and we have to know how many times it's written, which is 3. So to write it in exponent form, we would write 12 to the 3rd power. In order to write it in standard form, we would have to multiply it out. It's very tempting to say 12 plus 12 plus 12, but that's also very incorrect. That's multiplication instead of repeated multiplication. 12 times 12 is 144, and 144 times 12 is what we would have to calculate in order to find the answer, and 144 times 12 is 1,728. So you can see that exponents help numbers grow exponentially, help them grow quickly. We got from 12 to 1,728 in 3 factors. Sometimes exponents are used with variables. This says y to the 3rd power, which means write y 3 times. Y times y times y. And in this case, standard form can't be used unless you were to see 4y equals 2. If this was written y equals 2, then we could go back and we could take out the y and put in a 2. So our problem would be 2 times 2 times 2. And 2 times 2 is 4, and 4 times 2 is 8. So sometimes if the exponent is there and you only need factor form, then y times y is your answer. But if it tells you what to substitute for y, then do that to get standard form. All right, last example, 64. Ooh, write down. The base is 8, which means that I have to use division, the opposite of multiplication, to figure out what this answer is. 64 with a base of 8. 64 divided by 8 is 8. That means 2 8s makes 64. That means 8 to the second power is my answer. And in factor form, it would be 8 times 8. Now, before you get to show what you know, we're going to talk about two special exponents. This says n to the second power and n to the third power. And our sentence says anything to the second or third power makes a shape. And we often call these exponents by their shapes. Let's take a look. Let's do 2 to the second power, which means that it would be 2 this direction and 2 this direction. And when I close my shape, I have a square. 2 to the second power is 2 times 2. 2 times 2 can very easily represent the base and the height of a square. And the area of that square is 4. So very often when we have something to the second power, we call it squared. This could be read n squared, and this could be read 2 squared. Because if you have a number and you make a square, it takes 2 of them, a base and a height. So maybe that helps you figure out what 3 would be, because you would have that height of 2 and the base of 2, which would make a square. But you would also have a third dimension. So we would have length, and we would have width, and we would have height. And that makes a cube. So this, if it's 2 by 2 by 2, we would call it 2 cubed, because there's a length and a width and a height, because there are 3 numbers that are the same. And anytime you have 3 numbers that are the same, you have 3 dimensions, then we could call that cubed. So 2 to the second power is 2 squared, 2 to the third power is 2 cubed. And that works with any base. So it's time to push pause and show what you know. Right. Write in factor form and then find the value. Find the value means find out how much it's worth. Writing how much it's worth would be writing it in standard form. Let's try it. 3 to the third power or 3 cubed. Either answer is correct. Very often it said 3 cubed. We would write it in factor form, which means we would write our base, the amount of times our exponent says to write it. So 3 times 3 times 3 is in factor form. Find the value. We would do 3 times 3 is 9, and 9 times 3 is 27. We have written it in factor form and found the value. Do the same thing with 4 to the second power or 4 squared. 4 times 4 is 16. These two say write in exponent form and find the value. 10 times 10 times 10 times 10. My base is the number that has been repeated, which is 10. My exponent is the amount of times it has been written. 1, 2, 3, 4. 10 to the fourth power. And 10 to the fourth power, because it says find the value, is 10,000. 1 times 1 times 1 times 1 times 1 times 1 times 1, written in exponent form, is the base is 1, and the exponent is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So this is 1 to the 7th power. 1 to the 7th power is 1. Scott has 2 cubed video games. Aaron has 3 squared video games. Who has more, and by how much? So first we find out how many Scott has. Scott has 2 times 2 times 2. 2 times 2 is 4, and 4 times 2 is 8. So Scott has 8 video games. Aaron has 3 squared, which means 3 times 3, which is 9. Now rewrite it and you can quickly answer it. Scott has 8 video games, Aaron has 9. Who has more? Aaron. By how much? 1.